Right, so we're looking at how do I prepare for the assessment week? And the simple answer is that it's going to look a little bit different for everybody, but we need to know how to use our class notes, our slides, and our textbooks to prepare. We need to learn about different study methods. We need to know how to analyze questions, and we need to know how to manage our time while answering in the answer paper and utilizing different answering techniques. Okay, so I'm going to focus mainly on the first two today, and then the bottom three we will look at on Wednesday. It's important to know that if you are going to let your distractions take away from your goals, you will never reach your goals, right? So it's important to focus on being present when you are studying, putting your phone away. We looked at ways in which you can do this when we did the timetables and the class preparation, okay? But if you need any more advice on that, you can either send me an email, ask me for the link on webinar 2, or we can then look at it again if you are not sure. Okay, so the thing with this quote is try not to procrastinate. That's the big thing. Right, so just a recap of the skills that we have covered so far in the previous webinars. The first one was about goal setting. And this is important for this webinar as well, because the goal that you set at the beginning of the semester is going to be the goal for every assessment. So specifically for your semester test, when there are assessments that can fall away, typically the semester test is the one that has to count. So the semester test has to be that goal that you want. So if you want to achieve 60 for your 373, your 373, then you have to get 60 for this paper at least. Okay, otherwise you have to look at revising your goals. The second thing we looked at is class preparation. So we looked specifically at how do I utilize my textbook? How do I make notes in class? How do I then take those, make neat notes? And then how do I utilize those in study methods and study styles? Right. We also looked at using your time and your resources as part of that class preparation. So the study styles I'm going to look at again. This is how we are all different, and when we are different, using the same method is not going to have the same results because we are all different. So I'm going to look at that again, but not as in depth as in webinar 3. So if you want more information on that, you can just ask me to send you the link to webinar 3. Okay, so this is the study styles. We said that we are all different. So you are going to have different strengths, whether that is going to be being a social person, being a solitary person, being someone who moves quite a bit, someone who likes visual cues, verbal cues, communication, someone who's logical versus someone who's auditory. And you'll see that if you take the quiz, I'm going to give you the QR code to the quiz just now. And the quiz tells you, say, for instance, you are auditory. It will mean that is your strongest way of studying, is the auditory learning, right? But you will also have, say, for instance, verbal or logical skills. And that's where this combination comes in. All of us have multiple strengths, right? One is going to be stronger than the other, but this is going to be, you are going to be a combination of various things, okay? And the way in which, okay, so we also did, I'm going to share the link now. I thought I mixed up these two slides, right? So we said that when we are studying, when we are a student from our first year right up until every year is like building a house. Every module that we have is a house. And when we make notes in class, when we prepare for class, that is when we are building the foundation. The preparation for your class tests and for your assessment week test, that is where we are adding the walls and the windows and the doors. The very last part is the roof. That is our exam. And the problem is that many students want to start building the house when they are already at the roof phase, which means that their foundation and their walls are not strong enough to keep that roof up. And that is why we sometimes fail our exams, or we fail to get the sub-minimum. Very often we want to get, I'm sorry guys, there's just a noise outside my window. Often we say, okay, now I'll save it in the exams, right? So we get sub-minimum 40%, and then we think that we're going to write up 60% in the exam. It's always better to have it the other way around, to go in with a strong term mark, and then to have a weaker exam, but then still pass your module for the semester. Okay, so we'll look a little bit at how do I make sure that, or if my module mark is poor and I wanted 60%, how am I going to get to that? What is the math around averaging out your module mark and your exam mark? But we'll look at that in the next webinar, which is going to be on Wednesday. All right. So for now, we are focusing still on how do I build this house? What are the learning materials that I need, right? Where is that? I'm sure I had that link, guys. Okay, I'm sorry. I don't have the link to that quiz. If you wanted, you can just send me an email and then I will send it to you. And then yeah, you can do the quiz on what kind of learner are you. Okay, so let's get to people who want to study the day before the time, right? So this is a typical student. I'll study the day before my test. I have too much work to plan and to do all of this preparation. But this is not a good idea, right? If you have a smart friend, they would have told you this is not a good idea. Why is this not a good idea? So this graph is on this end, right? It's the amount of knowledge that you have, right, when you learn the work the first time. This is the amount of time that goes by until you write the test. And what happens is, if you learn it now, over time, we forget, right? This is human physiology. We will forget over time. But if we do repetition, okay, we catch our curve before it hits the bottom early, and we do repetition, then the amount of work that we need to remember for the test is fewer. If we do this multiple times, then the day before the test, we already remember this because we've revised. And that means that the day before the test, the amount of work that we need to catch up is much less than the work that we would have had to catch up if we just let it go all the way up until the day before the test. Okay, so the key here is what we call spaced repetition. So over time, you need to go and revise your work often so that we increase the amount of work that is stored in our long-term memory rather than focusing on our short-term memory. Because if we focus on our short-term memory, right, the short-term memory is the day before the time. That is when we say, oh, I can remember what page this was on. I can remember exactly in what color I highlighted, but I can't remember the words. And that's because you've overloaded your short-term memory. Whereas if you focus on the short-term memory just for the revision, right, but the actual studying you've actually done prior to that, then you are putting yourself in a much better situation to be successful when you write the test. Okay, so this is basically just the curve of your memory, and every time that you repeat the work, that memory increases, that long-term memory increases. But what does that look like in practice? So I always say that we use the days before the time. So you have to start studying for a module at least a week before the time. And you have to count down on the calendar, right? 9 days before the time, 7 days before the time, 5 days before the time, 3 days before the time. If you are lucky and you don't have multiple tests like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, right? Then you can utilize day 2. Otherwise, you can just utilize the day before the test. Okay. Then you have to work on quarters. So you have to write out each module and the amount of work that you have to do for that module. And then you have to say, okay, if it's 4 study units, say for instance, you are doing URI 272 and you have 4 study units for URI 272's test. On day 9, you have to do the first quarter of the work, which is 1 study unit. On day 7, you have to do quarter 2. On day 5, you have to do quarter 3. Ooh, askies. And on day 3, you have to do the last little bit. So every day, so on day 9, you do quarter 2. Then you revise quarter 1, you do quarter 2. Then you revise quarter 1, revise quarter 2, and then do quarter 3. And what I mean with this is active recall, right? So you read through your summary and you see how much you can remember. Until you can remember everything, then you continue with the next quarter of work. Then you revise again and you do the next quarter of work until you've done everything. Then you do all 4 quarters of revision in revision questions. We'll look at that just now. Okay. So what you need to do is you need to write out the modules that you have, and you have to write out the study units for each module that you need to cover in order to divide that into 4 parts. So for instance, if it is study unit 3, 4, and 5, which is only 9 study units, then you look at what is the biggest one and you divide that one into 2 parts and you do that one in 2 parts. Okay, so it's about making the work less for you, okay, but then also adding enough time in between for you to revise. Because if you then just do 3 study units, say you only do day 7, day 5, and day 3, then you're not going to revise it enough for you to be able to do those revision questions the day before the time. All right. Everybody with me so far? No questions. Great. Awesome. Okay. Right. So what does this look like? If this is your timetable, right, you are a 3rd year, but unfortunately you have 272 and 213, right? This is now just an LLB student. And it's a hypothetical example, okay? If these are your modules, what will this look like if I use the 9, 7, 5, 3, 1 method? For URI 213, I will then have the first quarter of my work 9 days before the time. The second quarter of my work 7 days before the time. Then 5 days before the time, then the last little bit I do on the Friday, so that the Sunday, all of my summaries are done and I can just focus on the revision questions, right? If I add URI 272, this is what it looks like. So now I'm doing a little bit every day. And then if I add 376, then that is where it becomes a little bit more difficult. So I have to divide my day into 2 parts. Okay, when I have 376 and 213 on one day. My suggestion is always to limit it to 2 modules per day. Never do more than 2 modules per day. When you have revision questions on the day, right, I would suggest only focusing on that module. So in this case, I would say move your 376 to the Saturday, because you're going to have more time on the Saturday and you want to focus on your revision questions here. The same goes for the 22nd. So you can choose either you're going to do this last little bit of 272 here, or you can do it here. The trick is you should try not to move things ahead. So if you're not going to do it 272 here, right, try not to move it forward, rather find a different space. So maybe do a full day of 272 here, then do a little bit of 376 here, because you can always, what you don't do there, you can add here, right? Or what you can do is entirely move this whole bit up 1 day. So move that quarter to the 14th, this quarter to the 16th, this quarter to the 18th, and then you have a little bit more time to play with. But always move up in the calendar and never down. Okay, if you move down, you're going to find yourself that you're going to start cramming again. All right. So we do this in order to give ourselves time to trust our brains and for our brains to start trusting us. Okay. If we leave everything for the day before the time, we're not going to get enough revision in. Our short-term memory is going to be overloaded, and we're going to forget things in the test or the exam. Okay. Is there anything about this before I move on? Okay. If you are not sure how to tackle this and you want to make an arrangement to see me, you are more than welcome to do that. I will share my contact details in the the last slide, I think. Right. Okay. So more tips when studying. Don't cram. I've said this twice already. It's very important. Your short-term memory is not strong enough. Make your own notes. This is because typewritten, right? So typed out notes, your brain doesn't remember those. It only remembers your own handwriting. So it will not remember your friend's notes or anything like that. Okay, unless you are very, very, very clever. And I've never met anyone who did really well who actually focused on their own notes. Okay, who focused on their friend's notes. So it's very important to make your own notes. Then you should have goals. Okay, so if your aim is to have 80% for the module, then you have to, at least if you find it difficult to reach that 80, break it down. Say, okay, in the first test I want 70, then I'm going to get 75, then I'm going to get 80. Okay, so at least have like goals that you can adjust for yourself, but be realistic also. Not all of us are 80%ers. Yesterday, I was telling a colleague of mine how I could never get a distinction. I could always just get like that 72. So I always aimed for distinctions, but I sometimes reached it. Most of the time, I got like a 72. So for my undergrad, my honors, and my postgrad, I got 72s all the time. So there was just that little bit of effort lacking from my side, or it was probably because I didn't spend enough time on my studies, or I don't know, I didn't have this kind of help when I was studying. Avoid procrastination. And then the last thing is do the work that you dislike first. Because if we do the work that we like first, then we spend more time on it, and we tend to then reject, or what do you say, neglect the work that we don't like. And the work that we don't like is typically the modules that we're going to do poorer in, and we want to avoid that. So we want to do the work that we dislike first when we are still fresh and we can still focus, so that by the time our brains are a little bit tired, we do the work that we like, and that gives us that kind of revived energy that we need to push a little bit harder. Okay, so those are the tips for studying. Right. Oh, here it is. I don't know. It seems like I've had multiple, yeah, I don't know what happened. Anyway, guys, this is the learning style quiz, so you can scan that QR code. I'm going to give you 5 seconds or so. So the QR code here is going to open up a link to an independent learning style quiz. And according to this quiz, it's going to tell you whether you are introverted, extroverted, because that will tell you, are you going to be a good group study person? Are you intuitive or are you detailed? Because that's going to tell you whether you need to use the Cornell method or the charting method. We'll get to those methods just now. So this is a very nice quiz for you to determine not only your personality type, and obviously those change. So if you've done this quiz before in grade 12, your personality would have changed. So I wasn't always an extroverted person, but I've grown into becoming more of an extrovert. I've never been a detailed orientated person, and although I wish that would change and I would become more detail orientated, it hasn't happened yet. So this is a very nice quiz, and then it tells you, are you a kinetic learner? Are you a verbal learner? Are you an auditory learner? And what type of studying method works well. Okay. I'm going to move on. If you need this quiz, just send me an email or ask one of your friends to just send you the quiz. So because we are all different, we are going to look at different methods. Okay, so the first method is the outline method. And this is where you create hierarchy and organization. You use a visual representation such as shapes, colors, and images. And it's flexible, so you can add multiple subheadings and multiple paragraphs underneath this. Okay, what would this look like in the context of law? So this is from URI 173, which is family law, and my main heading here is marriage. Then my subheading would be, what is the definition? The definition is, and this I got from the slides, legally recognized voluntary consensus monogamy, one man and one woman. Okay, so immediately I see here, what about same-sex marriages, etc., etc. Okay, so I know that this, like the second part, is going to be here's marriage. The next one is going to be, okay, what is a civil union? What is the definition of a civil union? Right. Then underneath that, I need to know what is the legislation, and we're probably going to look at the Marriages Act here. And then the next one is we need to know what cases go with this, right? So the case is Cars versus the Minister of Home Affairs, and this is also what I found in the slide. So all of this should form like one unity, okay? That's the outline method. The next method is the Cornell method. And this is where you divide your paper into 3 equal parts. It's supposed to be equal, but your summary is often a little bit like lacking, okay? In this part, you do clues, questions, prompts. On this side, you do detailed notes. So you do your definition, your important facts, your supporting details. And then underneath, you do your own work, your summary. So the thinking behind this is that the clues are what you do, are what you do during your class prep time, right? So you write here, if it's marriages, then you do marriage, definition, legislation, case. Then during the class, this is where you make detailed notes. And then afterwards, you go and see, okay, if this is what the teacher told me, or this is what the lecturer said, what do I understand in my own words? Because that's where the application comes in. It wants us to see, can we do this in our own words? Can we understand the legislation? What does that look like? So I've looked at hermeneutics in URI 213, which is legal interpretation. And my 2 main things are my definition and my case. Then my detailed notes will come from my class, and X versus Z is the interpretation case. So this is a made up case that I just put in here, just to show you like what the structuring should be like. Okay, so the definitions here are Watergang defines hermeneutics as the science of understanding, or more specifically, the theory of interpretation of text. Baxter describes it as an understanding and explanation of text to reveal the inherent meaning. It is the art of understanding the techniques, methods, and approaches. So all of this in my own words is, hermeneutics is, how do we understand text? Okay, so this is what you do during that 9-7-5-3-2-1 days, is these summaries. Okay, right. Next one is the charting method. So this is where, okay, wait, I see here something about a QR code, something. QR code for the learning style quiz does not work on my part. Will you please make it available? Okay, Miss, I'm hoping it's Miss Vermaak. I will find the link and then I'll share the link in the chat when I'm done with the different charting methods. Okay, great. Okay, so the charting method is where we use columns, okay? So, or a table. And this is where you have like your descriptions at the top of what you need to remember and the outline method. So I actually use this when I prepare for my longer questions as well. I'm going to show you now. If this is the way in which your brain will work with information in a contracts, law of contracts scenario, we replace the method with the term that we are working with. So in this instance, we're working with contractual capacity. Then we have a description of the definition, right? A description of consensus between natural persons. And then we have legislation. So if the definition has legislation or a case or extra information, then we add it here. If the consensus between natural persons has legislation, cases, and extra information, then we add it here. Okay. The legislation will obviously, when you study, if there is like a specific section, then this is where you will add the specific section. Okay. So what is important that I want to just quickly go through with you guys is you will see that when I study, it doesn't matter which method I use. My subheadings are description or definition, legislation, case, extra information. If I go up, right, it's definition, case, legislation that I will add here. If I go up, then it's definition or description, legislation, case here. Okay, so this is important for what we are going to get to just now, right? Okay, the last one is going to be mind maps. Mind maps are very intricate, right? But it gives you a general idea, and I wanted you to show you. So obviously, when we do it like this, we are typing. But I said, don't type. It's very important that you use your own handwriting, okay? What would a mind map then look like? So I'm a visual learner. The mind map looks like this, okay? So I have my different headings here. And underneath all of these headings, I will have my legislation, which I always highlight in the same color, which is blue, my theory, which I add in yellow, my cases, which I add in orange, and my definitions, which I add in red. Okay, so this is what a mind map would look like if you wrote it out, right? The thing that I want you to see here is my cases have funny names. So the Mazibuko versus City of Johannesburg is the water case. The Alpha versus Blue Crane Municipality is the no arm case. The Rademan is the rates and taxes case. The Mhlongwane is the state and police. Okay, so it's a service delivery protest case. And because I've named them like this, it's going to be easier for me to remember the story, because a case is basically who is suing whom over what and why should the court be involved. That's basically what we want to know for a case, right? So when we get to the revision questions, we need to look at taking our time. The more we are in a rush, and this is why we start early, so that we leave a whole day just for the revision questions, so that we can focus and do them properly on the day before the time. You write out a proper essay, okay? So you look at what is my study unit outcome. The study unit outcome will always be in the form of a question. Then you write out a proper essay. You try to write from your head as much as possible, but you are allowed to use your summaries, right? Make crib notes. So the crib notes are what you're going to make while you are busy writing out your essay. And then you always reference case law. So we start now with the case law. And we know that we have to have the FIRAC method for case. So the facts of the case is what happened. The legal issue is why should the court be involved? Why did someone take this to court? The rule of law is the legislation that the judge is going to use to make a ruling in that specific case. They're going to apply the rule of law to the legal issue or to the facts of the case, right? And then they are going to say, okay, what is the remedy that needs to happen during this specific case? So either we're going to pay each other damages, or someone is going to spend time in jail, or whatever the case may be, right? So this is basically how we summarize a case. And if I did, like, for instance, the no arm case, right? The Arthur family, which was, they were kept anonymous, right? They sued the municipality because the little girl was playing in the backyard of her grandma's house, and she got shocked by a disposed electricity or an exposed electricity wire, and she lost her arm. And all of that I can remember because I called the Arthur case the no arm case. So she lost her arm, and I immediately remember. So what is the legal issue? It's service delivery neglect on the part of the municipality. And you know, did the girl lose her arm because there was no maintenance on that line? The rule of law is going to be my municipal local governance act, and then the application is going to be what the court decided. So in this instance, the court decided that there was actually a maintenance bucky or whatever, and they wanted to see what is going on with the electricity. So they did actually do the diligence. The little girl just was on an unfortunate place at an unfortunate time, right? So this is how I need to remember my case. Why? Because when I'm writing out my essay, this is going to be my example. So I need to know two things from this example. I need to know the legislation and the theory that I'm going to study. How was this applied in this specific case? And if you are a third or a fourth or a fifth year sometimes, the scenario that they're going to give you in the question is going to have similar circumstances or similar facts to the cases that we studied. Okay, so this entire example is then written into our essay. Is everybody with me so far? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, great. I see some thumbs up, so we can move on. Okay, so we have FIRAC. Then everybody, I think it is in 174, they taught you to answer your questions in the IPAC method, where we identify the legal principle, we apply the legal principle, and then we write a conclusion. Now, this is a little bit confusing, especially because in the application, a lot needs to happen, right? So I actually prefer an ideal method. And the ideal method is exactly the same. So you are still going to have the issue. You are still going to define the legal principle. You are still going to apply it, but instead of just applying this, we're going to say, I'm going to elaborate my defined principle, and then I'm going to give an example. And then in my conclusion, I'm going to link that with a specific scenario, or I'm just going to conclude. Okay, so what does that look like in practice? When I'm writing out my essays, I need to identify the issue or the idea, the main idea. And here you can refer to your question for clues. Okay, so you write a sentence about what this paragraph or this essay or this short question is going to be about. And it can look something like this. This answer will deal with the issue of X. So usually in your question, it's going to say, in law of evidence, can this confession be deemed legal? So this answer will deal with the issue of the legality of a confession. Simple as that, okay? Then you define it. What is the legality of a confession? So define the idea of issue according to what you have studied. This is defined as what, according to what. So sometimes it will be legislation, sometimes it will be theory, sometimes you will forget according to whom or to what, but you can remember the definition. Then you just say, this is defined as, and you give me the 3 or the 4 main headings underneath that definition. Then we move on to elaboration. So this is going to be the bigger part of your essay, and this is where you're going to have to write 2 or 3 sentences, including the theory on this concept. You are also going to refer to the legislation, right? And then you are going to give an example, and this is where you give your case law. So like I mentioned before, the scenario in your question will have similar facts as the case you studied before, when you revise this specific issue. So this sentence will start something like, legality of confession was applied in A versus B when it was decided that. And then you tell me, okay, what were the facts of this case? What was the legal issue in this case? And what was the court's decision? Okay, and then you link it. You're either going to have a scenario or you are just going to write a concluding page. So you link this paragraph's concept with the overarching theme of the question. So for instance, if it says, what is the legality of a confession? Then you say, okay, in the scenario given, Piet Pompey's confession cannot be found to be legally binding because this and this and this was not followed, or it is legally binding because this and this and this, right? Or if there's no scenario, then you write a concluding paragraph, and that can look like, similarly, X can be applied here, or X can be applied in general because, and then you tell me like a short summary of everything that you've discussed in your essay. Okay. If you've done this, it means that if you are asked in a multiple choice to define the principle of the legality of a confession, then you've already done the revision on it. If it asks you which of the cases below are linked to the legality of a confession, then you've already done it, right? But we can't study as if our entire paper is going to be a multiple choice. Rather study as if your entire paper is going to be long questions, and then from the long questions, you will be able to answer the shorter questions. Okay, so don't work short questions to long questions. Rather start with the more difficult questions and then work your way towards the more easy ones. Right, is everybody with me so far? All right. Okay. So the next thing we need to do is, okay, how does this look when I get to the exam? Oh, I forgot to put in my animation there. Right. So this is a question from URI 173, and it says, discuss the case of Nhlapo versus Zemo in relation to the claims for breach of promise. So important. What does it mean to discuss? To discuss something means that you have to debate 2 or more standpoints at the same time. So we're not going to debate, we're just going to put, we're not going to do it at the same time, we're just going to put them one after the other. The example that you have to do is already given to you, so you don't have to remember that claims for breach of promise goes with that case. The lecturer actually already told you what the case is, what the example is going to be that you have to discuss, right? in relation to the claims of breach of promise. So that claims of breach of promise, you have to now discuss according to the issue, the definition, the elaboration, the example, and then you link it back to the question, right? So this is what you do the moment that they say, okay, start. Then you go and you say, okay, in Nhlapo versus Zimo, this is going to be my case. Say, for instance, the question just said, discuss claims of breach of promise. Then you would have had this essay is going to deal with the claims of breach of promise. It is defined as according to in Nhlapo versus Zimo, which means that the claims of breach of promise is, okay, so every time that you, if there's not a case mentioned in your question, then you should have, according to this method, you should have studied which example goes with that issue, right? Okay, so what does this look like in my answer? If this is my question, discuss the case of Nhlapo versus Zimo in relation to claims of breach of promise. I identify my issue, so I say, this essay will discuss claims of breach of promise by referring to the case between Nhlapo and Zimo. I define my claims of breach of promise according to what I have studied. And for this, I'll probably get 2 marks. Then I elaborate. This is according to section such and such of the Marriages Act, right? Or section such and such of the civil, I forgot the word. Okay, but the Civil Unions Act, there we go. Right, so this will be the majority of your marks will be here, right? Then you say it was also discussed, or claims of breach of promise was the legal issue in the judgment of Nhlapo versus Zimo, where, and then you give the facts, the issue, and the judgment of that specific case. Before you link it back, or you write a conclusion. You say, the judgment in Nhlapo versus Zimo showed the breach of promise is an important concept because, and then you give that to me, and that's going to be your final mark there. Okay, so this is basically what it looks like. So there are some generic phrases, right? This essay will discuss X. X is defined as claims for breach of promise is, so X is blah, 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 blah. Then you have, this is according to, and this is where you have to now study. You have to know the theory, you have to know your legislation, right? Then the example you put in here, it was also discussed, or this was also the issue, or X claims for breach of promise was also the issue in, and then you give the name of the case, right? And then you just write a concluding sentence. Why is this X? Why is claims for breach of promise important for our study of marriages or our study of civil unions or whatever the case may be? Okay. Any questions with regards to this? Nothing. Okay. Guys, I think this is the end of it. Yes. All right. So homework, just before I give you that link, right? The homework is going to be that you have to go to one of your modules, just one. Find the most difficult study unit outcome you can find for work that you've already done. So most of the modules are busy with content for study unit 3 or study unit 4, right? So you go to, for instance, URI 213, study unit 3, and you go and see what is the most difficult study unit, your study unit outcome, okay? So just quickly, if you go to your Ifundi page, Ifundi page, and you go, say, for instance, there's 376, right? You go to study unit 2. When you go to study unit 2, you see that, okay, the study, where is the learning outcomes? After completing the study unit, you should be able to establish a course of action. Advise your client on course of action. Define facta probanda, facta probantia. Identify elements of delict, contract, matrimonial matters, liquid communications. Okay, so in this instance, I would say, okay, my whole entire essay is going to be course of action. Then I need to define course of action. Then my elaboration is going to be advising my client, explaining to my client what is the difference between facta probanda and facta probantia. And then I'm also going to say that elements of a course of action are delict, contract, matrimonial, and liquid documents. And I'm going to define each of those, right? And then I'm going to say, okay, this is the same as, and in this instance, we can see here, King's Transport versus Viljoen. So we already know the cases. So probably you would have started, well, no, you probably wouldn't have started studying, but now you can start studying. Then you tell me, okay, in the case of King's Transport versus Viljoen, if it's a transport thing, I doubt that it's going to be matrimonial. It's probably going to be either contract or liquid documents. The issue was liquid documents. And then you give me the facts of the case, you give me the application, and you give me the rule of law here, right? So you do the example according to the FIRAC method, and then you say, okay, so course of action is important because the lawyer needs to know what is delict, contract, matrimonial matters, and liquid documents before they are able to advise their client on the course of action, which is defined as. Okay, so your link is either going to be application to the scenario. So how's the information that you've given similar or different to the scenario that the lecturer has given to you in the question, or it's going to be a summary of your entire discussion. Okay, so you can do that literally with any module. If we look at, let's okay, ACCL is a little bit of a different kettle of fish, né? Delict, study unit 1 to 6, go to study unit 2, and we have to know okay, nature of characteristics of conduct. So we have to define the term conduct, and we have to describe the nature and characteristics of conduct. So if I'm able to answer I and D, and maybe I can give an example, then I'm good to go with a long question for this. If there is a difference between the definition and the nature and characteristics of conduct, then I list them and I tell myself, okay, what is the legislation with each of these? What is the case with each of these? Okay, so I want to challenge you before we meet each other on Wednesday, because okay, this is the learning quiz. Luckily I remembered, otherwise I would have forgotten, right? Okay, so there's the link for the learning style quiz. So you can just click here and say take quiz, and then it takes you to, it asks you, are you studying what, and then it actually sees, okay, how many quiz takers are there? Of the quiz takers, it seems like we're a very visual generation, but I mean, if you then just say take the free quiz, it will tell you in which category of these do you fall, and what study method or style is going to be the best for you. Okay, right, but then I want you to go, and after you've then made those summaries, try and see, can you apply them in those study unit outcomes? So basically it's about making questions for yourself based on the study unit outcomes. Okay, why do we use the study unit outcomes and not previous papers? We use study unit outcomes because in the previous papers, the lecturers have already tested on some and discarded others, which means that it's not a complete preparation. But if we focus on the study unit outcomes, it's a complete preparation of that study unit. Okay, so for instance, if I was the 273 lecturer, I wouldn't ask both of these questions because it's going to be very much the same. But in, say for instance, in 2022, I've asked this question, and in 2023, I'm going to ask that question. So which one am I going to ask in 2024? Not necessarily the one that I've asked 2 years back. But if I, as a student, have prepared both of these in a long question, then I'm waxed. right? Then the lecturer can't ask me something that I didn't study. Okay. And these questions are what you do the day before the time. So on the day before the time, you are not supposed to be making new summaries, new notes. You are actually supposed to only be doing revision questions, making sure that what you have studied, you are able to apply. And not only apply, but you know that you are able to write those essays for this that study unit. Okay. So yeah, so on Wednesday, we're going to look at different questions. So I'm going to have questions, 2 questions from first year papers, 2 from second year papers, 2 from third year papers, etc., etc. And we're going to work through them. We're going to look at question words. So what does it mean if they tell me to analyze this and this and this? What does it mean when they tell me to advise my client? If I have to apply this to a specific case, how do I approach those questions? Okay, so we're going to look at that, and I'm going to look at how do I manage my time in a question paper. So if I have an hour and a half, how should I spend that hour and a half to ensure that I finish my paper?